state of California, Aaron. For example, LA County, in their CAFR, they have I think it's $66 billion in cash and investments. Walter Burien, who's a hero and the pioneer of this issue, as you know, he did a data sampling for California's various governmental agencies. He estimates that the total for California is about $8 trillion. That means that per household in California, there are 12 million households. We've been overtaxed, or more accurately, we have taxpayer assets over $650,000 per household. So what that does is that blows this so-called shortage and any need for austerity. That completely is a game changer.
It's totally insane because they've got their whole black budget issue and the public is never informed about it. And as you point out in your article, they don't remind the public. It is on the books, but you have to sort of hear about it and then look it up to even know what a CAFR is.
Yeah, and every state can go ahead and people can do this. I explored this as a hobby journalist, and I decided to check out three things. One is to contact my 2 state reps, and I'm pushing them. The other is local media. My local newspapers have been very, very interested about this because they just didn't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And the other areas I checked was law enforcement, and that has been a tangled web. But the word that I got from the LA County District Attorney's Office is that he said that it's not a crime to not disclose this cash. And of course, I followed it up. Please cite the law. And then please give an explanation of how all public statements saying that we have to go to austerity, how that isn't fraud and intentional misrepresentation from somebody who has fiduciary responsibility for comprehensive, accurate financial information.
It's mind-blowing to me because on the one hand, you've got the reserve cash. It could be redirected, as you discussed, to deal with the pension issue, which obviously people in the public sector have been paying into for decades. And then at the same time, the trend I'm seeing is all these large pension funds. I know a lot about the Texas teachers retirement system because I've been studying it the past few weeks. They're getting riskier with their investments to deal with the shortfalls. They're putting more on Wall Street, and they're dealing more with these leveraged buyout firms. So that money that's supposed to be there for teachers is more and more evaporated into kind of this fictional money scenario that's going on globally.
Yeah, I think you're giving them too much credit that they care about the teachers. This is just a cover story. If they really did care about funding these programs and the public good, they would disclose it. And economics really has good tools to be able to provide options for the taxpayers, and it's our assets. I think it might be helpful to take a look at, there are 3 broad areas of reform that the people, my colleagues, my friends, we point to. Shall we talk about that?
Let's do it.
All right. So one is monetary reform. We don't have money. We have its Orwellian opposite. It's a debt. What we use for money is created by private banks and the Fed as a debt that we have to repay with interest. As you may know, Dennis Kucinich sponsored legislation from the American Monetary Institute and Stephen Zarlenga, who is another pioneer and a hero in monetary reform, that if we just created money debt-free for the direct payment of public goods and services, then we have 3 amazing outcomes. 1, the government can become employer of last resort, and we would have full employment. 2, we would have optimal infrastructure because we could invest in hard and soft infrastructure with this labor paid directly with money that we create for it. And 3, what people don't understand is that infrastructure contributes more to economic productivity than the cost of its inputs. So we get the full employment, we get the best infrastructure we can imagine, and we get overall falling prices. That is what monetary reform can do, and that's one area of reform.
Right. So to do that, though, we have to take on the whole Federal Reserve System.
Yeah.
That's a big
one. Yeah.
But yeah, I think we'd all like to see that done. How do we deal with the Fed system? How do we make that a big enough political issue to get the public ground swelling behind it so that they can't ignore it anymore? Because obviously it has become an issue in Washington, but probably not a big enough public issue yet.
Yeah, that's really the question, isn't it, Aaron? And
Yeah.
that's really what I see in the broad picture of what Occupy is attempting to do, is for the 99% to have a critical mass recognize that in these huge areas, we're not being served, that really it's the 1%'s interests that are being served. And we just got to keep pointing to the facts. I think we're close, but until we're there, it's just another day at the activist office.
Right, right. So, yeah, obviously that was point one of your monetary reforms. What are the other 2 points briefly?
The other part is credit reform. Ellen Brown is the leader with this, and this goes into the topic of state-owned banks. Now, when you go into the smaller government agencies, Aaron, and they'll tell you, yeah, we have a cash reserve, and yeah, we need it, because this is like any household. If some crisis happens, you need access to cash to pay your bills. All right. If you had a state-owned bank, you could have at-cost credit for government agencies, and they wouldn't have to retain these taxpayer surpluses. As you may know, the state of North Dakota is the only state with an increasing budget surplus, and part of how they do that is that they have at-cost credit. The easiest way for me to say the benefits of this public credit, if the state had its own bank, it could issue 2% mortgages, 2% credit cards, and that would give an abundance of paying for all of your state tax costs.
All right, so bottom line, we know CFR is sort of the elephant in the room. We know, as you say, it could be redirected to cover at least a lot of this, if not all of this, budgetary shortfall problems and the unfulfilled pensions and so forth. How much of it is a criminal issue of people deliberately scheming the system and not reporting? How much of it is simply taxpayers not being aware of the CFR as a mechanism?
Well, that goes into the whole broader picture of what we're attempting to do, what you're heroically attempting to do with this show, is that it's a war for our minds. And we're just pointing to the facts, and that if we could just engage with these facts, then we could really work together to build this brighter future that we all want. While these facts are hidden, the 1%, they'll lie to us, they'll engage in more wars, economic and physical wars, and they'll continue to go down the path that we see, which is debt slavery.
So as you mentioned, California alone has 14,000, I think, different government entities. I don't know if they all have their own CFRs, but many of them do. So when we go state by state and people try to look up what their own states are involved in and how much CFR could solve those issues, where do you look? It's hundreds of pages in each document. What's the bottom line people need to look for? How do we interpret these documents meaningfully?
I would recommend just look up my articles, and then if you take a look at California, I began doing this in 2009, and I looked at the state of California, the county of Los Angeles, and the city of Los Angeles, and I guess it took me about an hour for each one, and then the biggest numbers jump out at you. The investment portfolio is where the big numbers are. Now, in California, that's $460 billion, and then there's over $100 billion, but they're spread out through about 80 different accounts. So just taking a look at the investments that are designated for so-called for pensions, but we already went over that.
Right.
And people can find those big numbers in that way.
But definitely this is an issue with other states besides California. It's just sort of the worst off at this point. Is that what you found?
Well, I haven't checked other states. Walter Burien says, and he's probably familiar with most states' status with this, is that this is just business as usual. If you take a look at what we know of the Federal Reserve and the unlawful U.S. wars of aggression as the macrocosm of the United States, each state is still run by those same two political parties, okay?
Right.
So they have their own game within the state, and part of that is this overtaxation and these pension, it's really a scam, because then it goes into these portfolios, which really goes into the rigged casino of Wall Street. And then part of the most insidious part of it is that, all right, so the state of California, we own $92 billion of debt securities while we're in debt $164 billion. That's not an investment, pal. That's a transfer of interest from one set of taxpayers to another, but minus the cost of the debt managers taking their cut. So if this was any household, we would just divest a little bit, and then our budget crisis would be solved just like that.
But obviously, they have counterparties who are interested in managing those investments, and that's part of the whole deal, going back to the party system and the way we're tied to Wall Street. Let me just bring that up since you mentioned it so people out there know. Britt Harris is the head of the Texas Teachers Retirement System. He went to Bilderberg 2012 this year. That's how he popped up on my radar. Let's get that full screen if we can. And they've been literally, there it is, him talking about new investment risk. They got KKR and Apollo, two of the biggest leveraged buyout firms, to manage billions and billions of this scheme they've got. And they asked the question here in this article, is the teachers' retirement system in the business of managing pensions or of running a hedge fund? And more, it's trending towards the hedge fund answer, which is just totally crazy because they're doing literally investing in casinos and losing money, investing on the derivatives market, and everything else that's been part of the problem with the larger economic crisis, not in any way part of the solution, at least as far as I could figure.
Yeah, and I haven't found one article that talks about the income generated by those funds for the pension. And that hopefully will be a bit of data that will help in other people's interested analyses of their state CAFR data.
Well, Carl Herman, thanks for bringing this up. Let people know the best place to find your work. Would that be Washington's Blogspot, or do you have your own site?
I do. I write for Examiner.com. I write for Daily Censored, which is the daily version of Project Censored. But I recommend people go to Washington's blog. The author who generated that site is brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great place to learn, too. In conclusion, what's your best statement to the people out there? How do we make this an issue? Is state by state the way to go?
I don't know, man. I think that everybody has to look for their own self-expression, and if this is an area of interest, I thought the state was the best way to go to take a look at the biggest numbers that belong to us in the state.
Well, I bring that up, of course, because the case you made with California, or you and Walter Burian's data, is just mind-boggling. It's just an astounding example of how this whole thing is almost designed to go wrong.
Oh, it absolutely is.
All right, Carl Herman, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you in the future. That's it for tonight's INFOWARS Nightly News. We'll be back again tomorrow. Keep watching, and don't forget about Prison Planet TV, where you can fund our nightly broadcasts and help us grow and reach more people.